Ever wonder what an ancient philosopher would make of a modern political leader? It's a pretty wild thought experiment. Well, today, we're going to dive into an analysis that does exactly that, using the timeless wisdom of Stoicism to take a hard look at a very specific political style. So let's get into it. So this is the quote that really kicks the whole thing off. It sets up the idea that the worst human failings aren't just mistakes, they're actually deceptions. They're vices that are trying their best to look like virtues. And this three-part warning, it's the entire framework for the analysis we're about to unpack. And who is the political figure being put under this Stoic microscope? Well, it's Sara Duterte. The source applies this ancient philosophical lens directly to her public character, to her actions, and it creates a really pointed and pretty unusual critique. And right here, you can see this central conflict the author is setting up. It's a direct contrast. On one side, you've got these classic Stoic ideals of what a leader should be, restraint, humility, a clear sense of duty. And on the other side, well, that's what the source presents as Duterte's defining traits: temper, arrogance, and confusion. The whole argument is built on this fundamental opposition. All right, so let's dig into that first vice the article talks about, the idea of ignorance dressing itself up as wisdom. So how does the author even begin to build this case? Well, it all starts with her own words. Okay, so the main piece of evidence the author points to is this quote from Duterte. It's about the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction over her father. Now, the analysis frames this statement not just as a political opinion, but as a symptom of something much deeper. So how do you get from that quote to feigned wisdom? Well, the argument goes something like this. The statement shows a real lack of understanding of international law, right? And it also suggests this kind of knee-jerk reaction against being held accountable. The source says this is why her words are like a blade without a handle. They end up being most damaging to her own credibility. Okay, moving on to the second pillar of the critique, the idea of cowardice pretending to be courage. And you can really see how the author's argument starts to build on itself here. So, the author highlights this particular quote from Duterte, where she's basically framing a physical scar as a badge of honor, a symbol of her toughness and her ability to survive all kinds of challenges. It's presented as her definition of what strength really is. But then, boom, the author hits back with this Stoic-inspired rebuttal. The whole point here is that just surviving something isn't automatically a virtue. From this philosophical view, if you just endure something without learning from it, without gaining any wisdom, you're just, prolonging your own ignorance. So you see what's happening, right? The critique is completely flipping that survival story on its head. What Duterte calls grit, the analysis labels as unprocessed anger. That scar, it's not a sign of resilience, it's the scar tissue of a temper she never mastered. And her public silence? The author argues that's not dignity, it's contempt. It's basically cowardice wearing a mask of strength. And that brings us to the third and final piece of this Stoic critique, malice that parades around as principle. Now for this one, the analysis shifts its focus a bit, moving away from her words and more towards her actions. And the key example the author uses to make this point, it's the whole controversy surrounding her office's confidential funds and the public's demand for some transparency. So the author basically walks us through her response when she was questioned about this. According to the source, instead of giving clear answers, she met questions with evasion. She's cited for refusing to even acknowledge the principle of transparency, walking out of hearings, and even throwing accusations around without any proof. The argument is that she just wouldn't engage with public accountability. And this is where the source brings in a really key Stoic term, apatheia. Now, in this specific context, it's not being used to mean a lack of emotion. No, it's defined as an absence of reason, basically a deliberate shutdown of any real discussion. And the author's claim is pretty stark. For Duterte, this isn't just a one-off tactic, it's a way of life. And all of this leads to a pretty harsh judgment from the author. From that Stoic perspective where true power is all about self-control, this kind of behavior isn't seen as leadership at all. In fact, it's called nothing more than a spectacle of pettiness. All right, so let's pull all these threads together. The source takes these three big critiques, ignorance, cowardice, and malice, and weaves them into one final overarching argument. And it's all summed up by that classic Stoic idea, character is destiny. And to really frame this final point, the author pulls out a quote from the big guy himself, the Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius. And the idea is really profound.
Being a wrongdoer isn't just about the bad things you do, it's also about the good things you fail to do.
And this is where the author applies that point directly to Duterte. The argument is that she fits both sides of that coin. There are the wrongs of commission, the things she allegedly did, like the lies and arrogance, and then there are the wrongs of omission, the things she didn't do, like her refusal to answer questions or be held accountable. And so, this is it. This is the author's final, brutal assessment of her legacy. The article concludes that it's a legacy shaped not by resilience, but by recklessness, not by wisdom, but by willful stupidity. So the source lays out this incredibly detailed critique, but it also leaves us with a much bigger, more universal question that you could ask about any leader, really. Where do you draw the line? Where does a leader's character end and their policy begin? Or are they, as the Stoics would probably argue, the exact same thing? Definitely something to think about.